this is just amazing that somebody's telling me that, my 5-year-old son's quite good at football. And as I'm driving home, I'm thinking, what on earth are you possibly thinking? I've got all that coaching background, educational background, done the sports science degree. And it's like, what you doing? And then when I got home, I was still excited. And I'll never forget typing into Google, because nobody ever teaches you how to parent or what you're doing. It's the first time I'd been a parent. I type into Google, how do you support a 5-year-old in sport? Because it was like, well, what do you do? It's all very well knowing something, but I don't know how to do this. And I think that's probably the saddest thing of all of it, that, children trying to develop, try and be the best they can. I'm a big fan of that. I think kids should have hope. I think they should be able to dream. I think they should aspire. Is then that it then becomes an all or nothing, that actually, okay, well, I haven't quite got selected for that program, or I didn't quite get picked for England. Oh, I'll just give up the whole thing. I get parents who'll say to me, "Oh, Gordon, my kid only likes one sport." And I'm like, not convinced I necessarily believe that, because I think kids like loads of things if they're given that opportunity. I think the thing for me is, all the way through anything they do, young people, we should be trying to develop multifaceted kids. You do a full 8 months, 9 months of a season, and actually, oh, my kid, oh, well, no, and I'll just carry on doing it for 12 months. And we're doing more than international athletes. And it's like, hang on a minute, what are we thinking here?
How are you? I hope you're enjoying the summer holidays if you live in the UK. For me, like a lot of parents, I'm spending a lot of time with my kids, playing different sports with them, watching them play with their mates, challenge themselves with some new activities, as well as balancing some work into the mix. And enjoying a relaxing trip to the Lake District, climbing a few hills in the process, and then cooling off in the lake and having a few beers. Now, this week's episode, well, it follows the same format as the last episode, where I'm joined by Parents in Sport founder Gordon MacLelland. We went on to enjoy a great conversation about youth sport, where we talk about the pressures on kids today, things that motivate children, how sport can help kids with life, and the character building aspect to it all, if we allow it. This episode's got some really, really helpful ideas for parents, for coaches in youth sport. Enjoy. Hi, Gordon. Would you be able to just explain to the listener and the viewer a little bit about your background and your interest in the parenting and sports space?
Yeah, yes, of course. I guess my whole life's been sport. I think as a young individual, being taken to absolutely everything that was on offer by my own parents, probably to keep me out of trouble, to be fair, led to a relatively good youth sporting career. Played county cricket. I was also an England under-19 rugby trialist and had some time. I had a couple of games playing league below the Premiership in rugby when I was, God, what was I then, about 20, 21. And then it declined. It went downhill a little bit from there, started picking up injuries. And actually, at the age of 23, 24, I stopped playing, but I got straight into coaching. I think I was the youngest level 3 rugby coach in the country at 24. I was coaching adults at 25, including some pretty decent under 18 players also as part of my day job. So I guess my life took a turn and went into coaching. I was also working in a school at the time and ended up, over the next 20 years, coaching every age group from under sevens all the way through to coaching adults. But the reason I got into this and the reason that I'm so passionate about it is when my son was 5, I took him to a local village hall to play football. I was doing all the wrong things. I was scrolling on my phone, paying no attention to him falling over the ball every 5 meters. It was a bit like a busman's holiday for me. And at the end of this football session, I was approached by a Premier League football scout. And I'm like, wow, this is it. This is amazing. Absolutely love football. Absolutely love sport. I was beyond excited. And I'll never forget walking out of there thinking, this is just the coolest thing in the world. Who can I ring? Who can I tell? This is just amazing that somebody's telling me that, my 5-year-old son's quite good at football. And as I'm driving home, I'm thinking, what on earth are you possibly thinking? I've got all that coaching background, educational background, done the sports science degree. And it's like, what you doing? And then when I got home, I was still excited. And I'll never forget typing into Google, because nobody ever teaches you how to parent or what you're doing. It's the first time I'd been a parent. I type into Google, how do you support a 5-year-old in sport? Because it was like, well, what do you do? It's all very well knowing something, but I don't know how to do this. And everything that came back was just really negative. All do's and don'ts, you shouldn't do this, showing the worst case parents fighting on the side and whatever else. And my son did end up actually signing for a Premier League football academy at the age of 9. But that early part of that journey, and for somebody with a background in sport, it was like, what am I meant to be doing here? How do you make any form of sense of this environment? And that's where working with parents in sport was born. That's where it came from. And I suppose in a way, it's charted my own parenting journey with my own two kids, my son initially, and then my daughter after that, who are both still playing at a high level, and trying to make sense of it in a way that's real, that we can work with. So that's pretty much the background and the story, I guess.
That's really interesting one. It's because yeah, I've gone through a similar thing myself. My kids are younger than yours. One's 7 and one's 10. And yeah, just in the few years that they've been playing sport, I can see how it's an emotional roller coaster on occasions, to say the least. So I'm intrigued. What would your big lessons be then that you've learned over the years through your own children to start with?
Oh God, look, I mean, I've done so many things wrong. I mean, I think that's clear from, the car journeys home with my son, where I think I held him to the same levels of account as those that I was paid to coach. I learned very quickly when my daughter came around and she put a foot down and told me how things were going to be, and it was probably the best thing that ever happened. I think you read lots of things as well about what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, that this would work and that would work. I think the biggest learning for me has also been it's not a one size fits all. Everybody seems to be trying to tell everybody what they should do, how they think, how they should feel, what they should do next. And actually, you've got to work with your own kid. Everybody's different. You've got to really understand them. I think you've got to be open to seeing sport as it is today. I think a lot of parents say to me, if you haven't got the background in sport, you've got nothing to draw upon apart from your own experience or maybe what your parents did with you. I think then, of course, some of those behaviors may not necessarily be the most helpful. But even now, when you think you've got it cracked, and I'm parent of two teenagers now, I talk about this every day. If you ask them to score my sports parenting, I'd be lucky if I got a 7 out of 10, because when it comes from me, it's the worst idea in the world. If I pass it secondhand via a coach, it's the best thing that's ever been invented. So I think it's an ongoing learning where I think if you're just open and prepared to understand and listen and adapt and think about what works for you in your context and your kid, I think you give yourself a chance. But we can only do that if we're open to listening to plenty of stuff and being more self-aware about how we support.
Yeah, no, without doubt, as you say, I think that openness is the key thing there. And it's interesting to hear you say about the individual element too, because every child has their own motivations, don't they? They have their own values, they're the way they go about things, different personalities. So yeah, without a shadow of doubt, that has to be factored in. I'm intrigued then. So when it comes down to trying to balance fun and pressure, what sort of things have you come across, and what would you advise in that respect?
Yeah, look, I think, straight away you're going back to it's going to be different for every individual, because what could be perceived as pressure by one child will actually be perceived as push and encouragement by another. And I think that makes it difficult. So to start drawing lines in the sand of where we think this should be is really tricky, because it's going to be different for different people. The one thing I always say to parents, I think a really good question to ask your kid at any point is, why do you do sport? Or why do you play football? Or why do you do gymnastic? Followed by what's motivating you at the moment. And the reason for that, two very simple questions. But actually, we need to understand our own kids. And if we don't know the answers to those questions, then it's going to be very difficult to support in the right way, particularly when things aren't going according to plan, particularly when our kids aren't motivated, particularly when we want to pick up conversations around crucial topics. We need to understand why they're doing it in the first place, not why we think they may be doing it. And I think the reality is with kids is I could ask that tonight, or any parent could listening to this, and then if we ask them 6 months from now, they may give us a different answer, and 1 year from now, and 3 years from now. And I think then that regular check-in, depending on their age, the stage, their own motivations, what they're trying to achieve, the programs they might be in, I think that becomes then very individual and very relevant. Now, most young people will say to the parents, oh, well, because it's fun and I enjoy it. The trouble is, what the hell does that mean? Because what's fun for one child may not be fun for another. And of course, the woman who did all the research into this, she didn't help us at all as sports parents. Amanda Visek, 81 different definitions of fun when kids were asked about their sport. Now, that ranged from eating hot dogs with your mates to grazing your knees to winning to playing in a competition, getting given new kit at the beginning of every season. But what was scary was that when they took all the adults away, coaches and parents, the kids put winning at 48th and being in a competition at 60th. Now, I don't get that, but then I'm happy to admit I've been institutionalized by sport, and my upbringing and everything that I've done is, it will be deemed in some places as slightly old school and slightly out of date. But the reality is, a lot of kids I work with also wouldn't put them that low. So I think it's important that we understand the individual that we're working with. I think the enjoyment piece for me when I chat to teenagers is when I talk to kids about the sport, I'd rather the teenagers were telling me they enjoy their sport rather than it being fun. Now, the reason for that, because I work in a lot of performance spaces in particular, is not every part of performance sport is fun. It's not fun when you're injured. It's not fun when you don't get equal game time. It's not fun if you get deselected from a program. It's not fun if you fall out with a coach or you fall out with a teammate. And I think if we're trying to prepare young people for the realities of the world, to let them believe that it's always going to be cupcakes and rainbows, as my daughter would say, is actually not doing them any favours. And, you know, and when I talk to kids about this, they're really grateful for the honesty. They actually say more than, oh, thanks for being honest with us, Gordon. Thanks for telling us I'm not going to be at my best every day. Thanks for telling me that I'm going to make a mess of it. And actually doing a better job of painting the reality of it. Now, if they're enjoying the sport, they're going to enjoy the best bits, which everybody does. But you also want them to recognise they're going to have to enjoy getting over some obstacles. They're going to have to face some challenges. They're going to have to get to the other side of them in the hope that if they do, they're then going to become better people and better performers because of that. But I do think that's a more realistic picture to the world of sport that anybody's been through. That's not going to change, regardless of what else is going on in society. That will always be the same.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. You mentioned that. I like doing an exercise with people I support, whether they're kids or adults, where you look at the different emotions that sport brings up. So whether it's the bravery to go into a tackle, or to encourage your teammates and to be vocal, or whether it's the anger, frustration because you haven't received the ball, the disappointment because you've made a mistake, all of these different things. And yeah, it just changes from day to day, minute to minute, really. And yeah, it is, as you say, sport's a great tool in some respects to develop resilience, would you say?
Oh, yeah, look, absolutely. I still think it's the safest vehicle to equip children today with a wide range of character and life skills that allow them to thrive in whatever walk of life they go into. The challenge we've got is how do we create environments that actually value those and develop them, as opposed to just saying the sport does it. Because I can guarantee you're putting your kid into sport, and every time they face disappointment, A, not having a conversation with them, B, blaming somebody else, C, making an excuse for them, and D, taking them to McDonald's every time we need to make them feel better. Despite that sounding really harsh, none of those on any research help foster resilience. Yeah, every single parent puts their hand up in our sessions and say, I want a resilient kid. So we've got to be really intentional about, if we're wanting it to help develop these traits in our kids, how do we then promote that? How do we highlight it with our kids? How do we give it as much of a meaning as the three most popular questions asked by sports parents to their kids of, did you win, did you score, were you the best player, and how did you compare to everybody else? And I'm tongue in cheek there because I did a Did You Win the other week when I was away because I couldn't be bothered having the chat we're talking about today. The trouble is, if that is the only type of conversation that we ever have with our kids when it comes to their sport, the only thing they're going to think we value is a specific outcome. Yet when you talk to parents, they're wanting the development of all these other things that go with it. So I think it's how we bring that to life and what it means for the performer, the coaches, the parents, and the environments around these young people.
You've just sparked one of my questions there was what things should parents consider not saying?
Yeah, that is such a that's such a hard one, and everybody talks about, letting your child lead the conversation. But the reality is, for most sports parents, we wouldn't hear anything from kids that we want answers to. The research says if you're going to ask questions, ask them those sort of open questions that allow them to reflect. Now, that's great in theory because it's helping them evaluate, talk about their performance. But then, of course, parents fall into the trap of asking those at totally the wrong time, whether it be the car journey home when everybody's emotional, or whether we've had a fallout at home. We even ended up getting a motivational interviewing expert onto the podcast to talk about this, about, when do you get your timing right with difficult teenagers, and what do you say? Because that is the real life version of what parents face.
Exactly, and they've got their own lives, their own stressors, relationships, and so on and so forth. So they're often in a highly emotional state when they're having these conversations and have to keep themselves in check. I'm intrigued. Going back to the whole thing about motivation for children. So I'll often find where you might have a child who really the motivation for playing their sport is for social reasons because their friends play. They might still be quite talented, but the parents I suppose, is wanting to drive them off the Xbox and see them being more committed. Yeah, what advice would you give to that parent?
Well, I think it's hard, isn't it? I'm currently going through it with my older son, who's taken some time, dropped to level with his main sport because he wants to focus on his GCSEs and spend some times with his mates at school, which he's never done in the past. Am I overly thrilled? Not necessarily. Can I see why? Yes. And I think that still goes back to understanding your own kid and why they play. The reality is the vast majority are not going to be Premier League players, go to the Olympics. Even, in these programs I work where they've even done some kind of selection, it's still the same. It's still going to be really, really difficult to get there. And I think we've got to stop seeing sport as that outcome is the success criteria. I think that outcome has got to become more of a byproduct of all the other things about getting them there and getting them involved and celebrating that and supporting that. And if they do end up achieving and doing a bit better, just moving them to the level that's appropriate to them. But that all those other things are still important. I mean, we haven't got a crystal ball. You think you're doing all the right things, at the early parts of the journey and pushing it. But actually, you don't know how your kids are going to react to you when they become teenagers, when they actually start fighting back. It's easy to start with. You just take your kids and tell them that this is what you're doing. Then starts to happen is when they get a voice and they realise is they start fighting back. And ultimately, we do know that if it's not driven by the kids, if the ownership doesn't come from them in the end, they're not going to achieve what you may want them to achieve anyway. They're really responsible for their development in the end and how much they want to put into it.
Yeah, it's amazing when you say that. I've been involved in the past on various different programs through different governing bodies, and I used to notice a huge shift from a child being 15, 16 years old to 17 years old, where at the 15, 16, they've got these dreams of being a professional athlete, and like these kids were really talented. And then by 17, they're still talented, but yeah, the motivation had changed so much. It was crazy, and they weren't willing to put in the harder work. And then as a result of that, maybe 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6 would actually then go on and progress. And I think the vast majority of them don't even play the sport anymore.
And I think that's probably the saddest thing of all of it, that, children trying to develop, try and be the best they can. I'm a big fan of that. I think kids should have hope. I think they should be able to dream. I think they should aspire. Is then that it then becomes an all or nothing, that actually, okay, well, I haven't quite got selected for that program, or I didn't quite get picked for it. Oh, I'll just give up the whole thing. When was the success criteria? Oh, well, if you're not an international, you've failed. If you've not, if that's how we're framing it, it's going to be really, really difficult. And actually, we've all got a responsibility that we want these young people just to stay in sport as the next, just from a society health perspective, and actually bringing their own kids back into sport, and then being the next generation of coaches and people who volunteer in clubs. There's a much wider picture to this.
Yeah, and I guess that's the challenge, isn't it, as a parent, because the way sports organised these days, you've got academies here and there, and it is so organised that you can fall foul of that I suppose, frame of mind where, right, okay, the reason why they're here is to be a professional or to excel in their sport. but actually the participation when they're 20, 25, 30s would be a really good outcome as well.
Yeah, and same at university, isn't it? I mean, what a great outlet. You go somewhere and you get to meet new people straight away because you can join a team or you can join a group. You know, straight away socially, you can be part of something and feel connected to something. And yeah, I think we've just got to, and this isn't about being, happy clappy either. This is just about being realistic to the realities of the world. And that stuff you were talking about with those 17-year-olds, there is a dawning of reality at some point where you realize how big the world actually is, and you can be a real success in an area and you move into another area and suddenly it's like, oh my goodness, this isn't quite as unique as I thought it was.
On the theme of participation, as I wrap up now, one of the big reminders for me as a parent and as a sports psychologist who supports a lot of parents and children, well, it's linked to the word motivation. As a parent, we've got our own motives for being involved in sport. We might like the fact that other parents are there and the social aspect ourselves, with our own motives for wanting our kids to be involved in sport, be that the competitive side, challenging themselves, being active. Then we've got our own experiences, biases, the way we were parented, the things that we did in the past and do now. And then there's our kids who are in the same boat too. They've got their own preferences, biases, experiences into the mix. And much like Gordon, I know I've had to have a word with myself on occasions. There's been a number of times when my boys have been playing, they've been doing well or not so well. And it's very easy to get carried away with yourself and let your emotions spiral out of control. But then when we think about children, well, their experience, it is so different to ours. Where we may have our experiences, they're going to see it through a different lens. I've seen it so many times where parents have mentioned to me that they just want their kids to enjoy themselves. And in the parents' eyes, being active, challenging themselves, maybe being competitive is what they're talking about, is what they think about when they're thinking about enjoyment. But the kid actually might play for social reasons because their friends do. And then this changes the whole dynamic around the types of conversations that are better served, that should be taking place. So rather than talking about the getting better or the winning, the losing, maybe the talk would be better served about, I noticed when you and your mate were laughing when such and such happened. Oh, it was nice to see you when you combined with your teammate to set up another teammate. That was great teamwork. Those types of conversations can be really, really helpful for a child to recognize what actually is happening, what's going on. And obviously, when we're talking about it in that sort of context, there's no pressure attached. And one thing I've got set up to be able to help parents and kids in this respect is a checklist. It's a checklist which talks about why kids play sport and again, why parents want their kids to play sport. It's really worth just taking some time to have a look at it and then talk about things from time to time and then adjust your approach accordingly. As is life, things change and change quite quickly. So it's always something that is helpful to go back to time and again. And I guess the same goes for coaches too. It's useful to actually read and get an insight into what parents are thinking, into what kids might be experiencing. And then you can question yourself and your motivations for being involved. Both of the links for the checklist are in the show notes. So until next week, where you'll hear some more good stuff from Gordon, have a great week. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.